Hello folks, Alex here. This is Alex Unabridged, and today it's time for episode 5 of Adventures in Genre, and May was for Magic Realism. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. So Magic Realism was my genre for May. The definition from the Oxford Dictionary is a literary or artistic genre in which realistic narrative and naturalistic technique are combined with surreal elements of dream or fantasy. Which could encompass quite a lot of stuff, I think. But I did look up some lists of, things that were sort of touted as works of magic realism, or certainly had strong magic realism elements to them. And I picked 2 that I liked the sound of. So I shall start off with The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This was an audiobook, which was also narrated by Neil Gaiman, and it came in at just under 6 hours in length. So this one is about an unnamed middle-aged man, to start with in the prologue, who returns to his childhood hometown for a funeral, and he gets, while he's there, he gets inexplicably drawn to this house at the end of the lane, where he meets an old woman and has an experience that opens up floods of memories that he's from his past, from his childhood, and that he's completely forgotten about. And he recalls a fateful encounter with Letty Hempstock, who's an 11-year-old girl who lived at that farmhouse at the end of the lane, along with her mother and grandmother. And she was an enigmatic girl, and had quite a peculiar family. And as the story unfolds, as his memories come to the forefront and he remembers the things that's happened, the man discovers as a child that the Hempstocks are kind of in possession of sort of extraordinary sort of powers and sort of a knowledge of a magical world, and he gets drawn into this as a kid, and a dark force is unleashed and that makes its way back into his world, and threatens to engulf everything that he holds dear, and he's got to confront his fears basically. And rely on the help of Letty and her family to help protect himself and the world around him. So it's a very, it is a fantastical story, but I think, by the virtue of the fact that he is a kid, this is the narrator retelling the story of what happened when he was a kid. It's kind of, as a kid, he doesn't really question the fantastical elements of it that much. So yeah, it's an enchanting story. I think made all the more so kind of an enchanting experience by the fact that it's Neil Gaiman reading it, and it is just like sort of story time with Neil, story time with your dad type thing. Really well read. Really, just doesn't need to do loads of different voices for the characters. It was just kind of emphasis on speech pattern, things like that. But it's magical. It really is just like having a bedtime story told to you. It sucked me in immediately. It blurs those lines between reality and fantasy, which I think is, obviously a key element of, I think, magic realism. The prose is lyrical, and it's captivating. It's not difficult in terms of its language at all. It's very kind of straightforward in that respect in terms of the vocabulary. It just kind of immediately sucks you in. It flows really well. Gaiman kind of takes you on a journey that reminds you that kind of magic can exist in the world, even in the most ordinary of places. And there's a lot of nostalgia in it as well. There's, nostalgia about childhood and the power of imagination, which I really love. There's some references to some childhood stuff that Gaiman makes, which I definitely relate to. They're very close to sort of memories of my childhood. And yeah, his writing is really excellent. His prose is beautifully crafted, and I like the way he conveys the ways that children's minds work, the sort of questions that they ask themselves, the sort of thoughts that they have. It's really warm, it's astute, as I say, it's relatable. So yeah, these musings, these relatable musings, immediately and quite effortlessly just kind of transported me into the world of this narrator as a kid. And it really captures the essence of childhood, and kind of evokes that sense of wonder and curiosity at the world that I think a lot of us, you know, kind of not forget necessarily, but it falls away quite a lot as adults. And we think we do need to keep reminding ourselves that wonder and curiosity are good things, they're good qualities, and that we kind of need to like still harness that of what we felt as a kid. So yeah, Gaiman really breathes a lot of life into the characters. He makes them feel very real, despite some of their fantastical natures. You've got, you know, the mysterious Letty, and then the menacing Ursula Monckton, who is a being from another world who has been brought back into the world of the narrator, and is employed as wormed her way into his family's life as a nanny. And she's not very nice, let's just say that. But each character is you know, they're really intricately woven into the story. There's a lasting impression made by each of the characters. They're all there's a real value to each of them in the story. You don't feel like, or I didn't feel like any was kind of like extraneous, you know. I think, yeah, one of the great strengths of this really lies in Gaiman's ability to blend that reality and fantasy together without any kind of jarring kind of feeling to it. He balances that really well, that kind of ordinary and extraordinary. It unfolds, as I say, really easily. There's a really good flow to it for me, and it drew me in incredibly easily. Like within, you know, within the you know, as soon as the prologue started, even though that's, you know, kind of the adult narrator, you know, just the style, the mystery of it really drew me in. And as soon as you get back into the childhood stuff, as I say, it's like for me it was instantly relatable. Gaiman uses or kind of fuses myth and dreams and memories, and kind of reminds us that there's more to life than what we just see in front of us, that we have to kind of look beyond that. And he delves, you know, into some philosophical stuff, most definitely, beyond just the kind of the fantasy adventures, if you like, of the characters. You know, there's a lot of stuff in there that are kind of dealing with the complexities of memory, of identity, the nature of good and evil, fear. There's like lots of really just kind of interesting questions posed by the child that, you know, I think are things that just they make me think, they make me kind of ponder stuff. So I really appreciated that element to it. It's a story definitely that resonated deeply with regard to the kind of the impact that our childhood has on us and on our lives. And certainly the idea of, like, the narrator particularly is a somewhat scared kid who gets scared quite easily and has quite a lot of nightmares. That is something I can definitely relate to. I was a particularly scared kid, and I had a lot of nightmares. Things scared me very easily. But he finds strength in himself that he didn't know he had when he's faced with, you know, with danger, with real danger, you know, life-threatening danger. And that strength as well is in part found because of the help and friendship and like unwavering support of Letty and her family. So he kind of has his own family, which has some difficulties, but they're okay. But, you know, there are definitely difficulties once Ursula Monckton comes into the mix. But Letty and her mum and grandmum are found family, most definitely. And yeah, there is this underlying message of courage and the ability to overcome darkness. That's you know, it has a real sense of optimism to it. The story, it has a sense of hope and optimism, despite the fact that tonally it's quite dark, it's quite melancholy in a lot of ways. There's a lot of humour in there, quite dark humour as well, but it is imbued with this sense of hope, I think, in it. I loved this. I thought this was just a wonderful. It's one of those kind of a warm hug of a book, despite the fact that it is quite... there's a sadness to the ending, but there's still the hope, as I say. But it's just the way it's told. It is just story time. It is kind of like a kid's book for adults. Although I would say, personally, that apart from a couple of slightly more adult references in it, I think this would be absolutely fine for, you know, kind of a young adult. I think it's one of those that kind of, you know, can sort of cross generations and ages. It's not just an adult book. It's because of the sort of the childhood versus adulthood kind of themes in it. I think it can work really well across, like, you know, a huge number of age groups. Yeah, I loved this. This is a 5 out of 5. This is a right. Okay, I want to read more Neil Gaiman now. As I say, I've read a lot of Neil Gaiman comics. I've seen adaptations of Neil Gaiman's work on TV and in film, etc. But I'd never read any of his prose, certainly not any of his novels. And I think I would probably look for them on audiobook if they're narrated by him, because I think that is part of the joy of it. He's a very, very good narrator. So yes, success for the first one, a 5 out of 5. Okay, on to the second one, which was Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter from 1984. I started this in this copy, reading it as a physical book, but and I started it sort of quite early into the month of May. But I found quite quickly that, I mean, the text is extremely small. And I didn't have these at that point, and I was really struggling to read it, really struggling to read it. So I put it aside and waited till I got these. And then I picked it up again, and even despite the glasses, it's just not in the sort of size text, it just wasn't a good experience. So I actually ended up switching to the audiobook on this. And the audiobook is narrated by Adjoa Andoh, who is a British film, TV, stage, radio actress, and has done quite a lot of stuff with the Royal Shakespeare Company, National Theatre, Royal Court Theatre, and she's actually been in a production of Nights at the Circus as well. She's done a lot of narration before as well, and it shows. She's done, I think, over 100 audiobooks. Whilst I mean, I'd read like the first chapter or so in there before I kind of gave up on because of the text size, and I was really liking it, just getting into it. But the audio narration, wow, yeah, it pushed it onto a whole new level. Somebody who obviously knows the text really well, and it wasn't a narration, it was a performance. It was absolutely a performance, and I think it just it pushed it to another level in terms of my ability to take it in, because there is, you know, there's a real rhythm to the language, to the prose. There's some dialect in there as well, and certainly for me, when I read that kind of thing, there's a little bit of not a disconnect, but there's kind of, it's almost like a slight delay between me reading it, having to interpret it, and then you know, understand it, etc. So whilst I don't mind that at all, you know, in physical reading of books, it does interrupt the flow sometimes for me, and especially when there's vocabulary that I'm unsure on or what have you, or things that I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce, things like that, because I tend to kind of read it aloud in my head, if that makes sense. Whereas with the audiobook, and someone who can read it with such flow, such rhythm, and such performance of these characters, it just flows into my head, and it just becomes like I just get lost in it, absolutely lost in it, and I really did with this. So yeah, it probably isn't to everybody's cup of tea. I think from the Audible reviews, it certainly wasn't, because it's very theatrical in terms of its use of the Cockney accents, things like that, the Russian accents in it. But for me, it was perfect, absolutely perfect. I couldn't say anything really against it. One or two sort of niggles with some American accents, but they were so minor that I really can't, you know, I can't complain. So in case you don't know what this is about, this is a tale set in the late 19th century, kind of turn of the 20th century, fantastical, and it follows the adventures essentially of Feathers, who is a larger-than-life realist in the circus, known for her wings. She claims to be part woman, part swan, and it's in told in three parts. The first one being in London, in her dressing room, where we also meet Jack Walser, who is a journalist interviewing Feathers about her life. And we essentially get her backstory, you know, how she was brought up, and we meet Lizzie, who is her foster mother, essentially, her foster mother, who is the woman who found her as a baby, abandoned, and took her in to the brothel where she worked. And we get Feathers' backstory, and we also get the story of all the women in the brothel, and we kind of get, little intimations of what Walser thinks about this story in terms of its believability. Then we get part two, which is in St. Petersburg, which brings us into more I suppose, current happenings of the nights at the circus, essentially, the circus troupe and what happens whilst they're performing in St. Petersburg. And we meet the members of the troupe, and we get some of their backstories as well, and how they all relate to one another, and more about Feathers and Lizzie. And then part three is in Siberia, where we see more of a band of characters, but kind of outside the theatrical setting of the circus, because they get stranded in Siberia on the way to Japan, essentially. And then we get to Japan, they get stuck in Siberia. And throughout all of this, as I say, we get the general narrative, but we also get all of these kind of side characters. And so, yeah, they we get all of these eccentric characters, we get information and kind of commentary essentially on societal challenges. Feathers' kind of character and extraordinary nature is kind of questioned and tested. Walser wrestles with his own belief, his own identity. And it's just a really rich exploration of a huge number of different things, basically. You've got feminism in there, fantasy, social commentary, surrealism, politics. It really looks at kind of the complexities of identity, and it's some really powerful storytelling. It kind of defies categorization, I think, a little bit. It's definitely, it is magic realism, but it's got elements of historical fiction to it. As I say, it's a very feminist text. It's got surrealism in there, definitely. But it's a gem. It's an absolute gem. I can see why it's held up, in such high esteem. Yeah, Carter's prose is just a marvel of how do you write this? How do you write how does anybody write like this? Somebody who's trying to write. And I'm not trying to write this kind of stuff. I would, unfortunately, this doesn't make me jealous as a writer, because this is not the sort of stuff that I would ever attempt to write, or kind of feel like that's the sort of stuff that I would write. But in terms of the imagination, yeah, that's there's a certain amount of there's definitely an awe there for me, and a little bit of jealousy. yeah, her language is, it's lyrical. It kind of dances across the page, or, you know, in terms of in the audio, it dances through your head. It's full of really vivid imagery. There's a lot of symbolism in there. She crafts a world that's both very grounded and gritty, but also fantastical. And those two elements really kind of intermingle, kind of quite seamlessly, I think. It's the whole book, the setting of it, the characters, everything are very much alive. You've got kind of, you know, the sort of squalid, sort of poverty-stricken underbelly of sort of Victorian London, to like these grand landscapes and opulence of St. Petersburg, and then kind of like the sort of wastes of Siberia. Her attention to detail is astounding. You get all of the kind of the sights, sort of smells, sounds. You can really imagine the setting, most definitely. You get very immersed in it. Thematically, it's so rich. It would take me an age, I think, to go through everything that I can kind of pinpoint in here. But certainly the primary ones for me are like self-discovery, gender, power dynamics. Those, you know, those are kind of like, I think, key. Certainly the gender and power dynamics, certainly of that time. Feathers is very much a symbol of kind of female empowerment and defiance, definitely. She kind of, to me, she embodies that idea of the new woman, which was a prominent idea at the turn of the century, where women were kind of forging a new place in the world that was in opposition to a kind of the subservient view of women that had kind of come before. And, you know, they're kind of going towards and demanding more empowerment, equality in the new century. And obviously we get through to suffrage, and, you know, so we're at the beginning of, or, you know, kind of early-ish days of the suffrage movement at that point in history. So yeah, Feathers really kind of embodies that drive, that passion, that defiance of women to kind of forge their path ahead to equality. She defies expectations. She embraces her identity as something kind of different, as someone unconventional, and she's extremely independent. I mean, Feathers is a particularly fabulous character in any novel that I think I've read, but all of the characters in this are as memorable as they are complicated. They are all superbly written. As I say, Feathers is a really captivating protagonist, kind of paradoxical in terms of vulnerability and strength. She's a very human character, even though she's actually quite a theatrical character, a very theatrical character, I would say. Walter, on the other hand, the journalist, who is captivated by Feathers, he serves as a kind of a contrast, really. He's, you know, he's kind of half finished, not in terms of Carter's writing, but in terms of a character. He's kind of ready to be moulded, really. He doesn't really kind of have a good sense of who he is when we meet him, whereas Feathers knows exactly, you know, who she is, and is very confident in that. So there's a really nice contrast there. And the supporting cast just adds so much flavour and quality and just fun, you know, sadness, etc. to the piece. You know, from people like Ma Nelson, who is the madam of the brothel where Feathers was raised, so called because she only has one eye, and from her to like even the pig, the psychic pig that is a pet of the kind of the owner of the circus, Colonel Kearney. You know, Sybil gets her own backstory. You know, you get so many different side stories, side shows essentially, like the circus. And the way that Carter manages to wrangle these vast multitude of characters and backstories and the things that they represent is astounding. It really is, because she never loses control of it. It never goes too far or off, you know, off point or what have you. It just fits really well into the whole like tapestry of this story. Yeah, she does it masterfully, the way that she controls these various parts. The way that the characters' speech is written is fantastic. The first part is almost, there's a lot of kind of almost monologue in there as Feathers tells her story, with interjections from other characters like Lizzie and Walser. But it immediately put me in mind of the Puss in Boots story from The Bloody Chamber, which I loved so much. So that's one reason why I think in the first part I was like immediately in, because like, ah, yes, this is the sort of stuff I like. You know, the narration also made a big difference here in terms of getting that sense of character, getting that flow. The brashness of Feathers and Lizzie and their way of talking in this very kind of pronounced Cockney, the bawdiness of it, the crassness of it, is so interestingly like juxtaposed with some of their like quite deep and very eloquent musings and musings and kind of diatribes as well, lectures on philosophy, politics, the nature of poverty, all that kind of stuff. It's such an interesting way of telling a story, and in terms of characterization, they really are like multi-layered characters. It's wonderfully funny one minute and beautifully poignant the next. Yeah, it's, you know, it's masterful writing. It really is. Beyond, you know, it's kind of it's thematic depth and it's just stylistic awesomeness. It's just a joy to listen to for this. I think it would be a joy to read had I been able to read the tiny text, but it was an absolute joy to listen to. It's one of the most interesting and just enveloping, all-encompassing kind of audiobook experiences I've had. I was hard pushed to actually kind of stop myself at certain points and just give myself a break from it, because it's one of those books where like the two very different books here, like in terms of the Neil Gaiman, I listened to in about 2 sittings, and it was very easy to listen to. It wasn't taxing in any way, shape or form, but it's you know, I could focus on it so easily. This, because of its depth and because of the complexity of some of the patterns of language, what they're saying, what they're talking about, having to actually think about some of the stuff that's in it in terms of what is it representing, what's Carter saying here. I had to kind of limit myself to kind of say like, okay, listen to this for like 2 hours maximum at a time, but really kind of 1 to 1.5 hours of listening, so that I could then stop and actually just let it digest. It's like having a really rich big meal. You might want more, but it's always better to just let it sit and just digest it, and then you can enjoy it a lot more. Because if you go too far with it, you kind of in this case, I think I would have lost some of the meaning. I would have lost some of the enjoyment of it, because my brain's just too full to properly get like the most out of it. So yeah, so I did limit myself on the audiobook to you know, chunks of it so that I could properly take it in. Yeah, it's whimsical, it's witty, it's extraordinary. I think it really, you know, it's one of those where I'm still quite shocked by what Carter has managed to do with the writing on this. It's like nothing I've ever read before. The only comparison I can give is, and this isn't really a comparison because they're very different writers and writing very different sorts of books, but Umberto Eco, I think that's kind of, it's, in terms of the experience of it, it's like I'm in awe of the writing. I'm in awe of the knowledge that goes into the writing and the mind behind the themes and the thoughts and all of that kind of stuff, and the way that they're portraying it. But it takes some work to actually take it in. I couldn't read this sort of stuff all the time. I think my brain will probably explode. But I definitely want to read more of Carter. I'm just going to have to, you know, make sure that I do it at a time when I've definitely got the focus for it. There's definitely lessons for me to learn from this as a writer. Many lessons. As I say, despite the fact that my stuff is never going to be in this sort of style. There's a lot of kind of, it's almost Shakespearean, some of it in terms of its style. There's a real, as I say, there's a real kind of poetry and pattern to it, a rhythm to it, and there's a complexity to it that I don't think I'm capable of, but also I'm not going for. But in terms of things like how the transformative power of storytelling, I think that's a big lesson to be learned from this, and how, you know, Carter does that. The imagination, I think the freedom of imagination is like a huge part of why I enjoyed this so much, and the fact that Carter isn't afraid to conjure up these like fantastical, larger than life characters, like, you know, the idea of a Cockney-born trapeze artist who is part woman, part swan, you know, and all of the various other characters and sort of fantastical things around that. But to not feel like she needed to give a justification for, say, Feather's existence. There's no need to try and like parse out why she exists, or even that she actually truly does. She just is Feathers, you know, she just is. Carter's just, she makes her real through the writing and dares us to disbelieve it. But the strength of it is that you can't, even though you might not be sure about whether she's real in terms of her wings and all of that kind of backstory, you can't not believe in her as a woman, as a character, as a human character, very human character. But then Carter kind of, you know, plays with us as well as readers, I think, in terms of, you know, is she real, is she not real, in terms of what she says she is, this part woman, part swan. Yeah, I love that she's just kind of gone, no, I'm, you know, that she makes that character so real through her writing that actually you kind of believe that this is all, you know, it's believable within Carter's world, absolutely. And yeah, I think the lesson for me is to not, even in my own head, try and justify something fantastical. That if I come up with an idea that I can make something out of, that I make real through the strength of the character and the world, that not feeling like I need to justify something, that I need to come up with justification for why something is a certain way. I think that's a really important lesson, because I do tend to question that myself when I'm trying to write stuff, and I'm trying to write horror stuff, and I've got to, as a writer, I think, suspend my own disbelief in my own stuff sometimes, and yeah, this has really kind of made me think about how to make those unreal or questionably real elements of fantasy and horror and all that kind of stuff work, definitely. So yes, this, as you might have already guessed, is an absolute 5 out of 5. It couldn't be anything but. This has astounded me, this book, in terms of the writing prowess. And I will absolutely, definitely be reading more Carter. I don't, like, Neil Gaiman, I kind of know where to go for more Neil Gaiman. He's a much easier one for me to kind of go, I'll try that, I'll try that, I'll try that. Carter, on the other hand, is much more unknown to me, much more of a mystery in terms of her other works. So if anybody has read any others and is a fan of any particular others, please do drop your other favourites in the comments below, and I will have a look into them. I think because sort of often the setting and the themes and stuff like that within Carter's work is stuff that I'm less au fait with, stuff that I would be less drawn to naturally. So I think, you know, a little kind of nudge in the direction of some of your favourites, if you've read any yourselves of other Carter works. So I've read this now and I've read The Bloody Chamber. Then yeah, that would be really helpful if anybody's got any suggestions of where to go next. So yes, two crackers, absolute crackers of books in magic realism, two very different books, and I will most definitely be trying some more magic realism because it's something that, yeah, I think I've got a real, it intrigues me, definitely, that balance between reality and sort of fantasy and the use of sort of naturalism within that kind of fantastical surrealist setting as well. Those blending of sort of settings, styles, etc. is really interesting, both just in terms of the writing style and how it's done, the mechanics of it, if you like, but also just the stories. The stories are, there's a real like sense of possibilities in this sort of genre, I think. So yes, right, I'll stop babbling, I'll stop raving. So next month, or this month now, because we're in June, June is for joy, so that is LGBT plus romances. And so yeah, so I've got 4 on the list. So I've got 1 for each of the L, the G, the B and the T. So very quickly, those are, for the L is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. For the G is Heartstopper, Volume 1. For the B, I've got Take a Hint, Danny Brown, which will be a Kindle Unlimited ebook. And for the T, I've got Felix Ever After, which will be an audiobook. So yes, those are my picks for June. I have started One Last Stop, and should have that finished in the next, well, probably this evening. So yes, and then I will be on to the others. So yes, thank you very much for watching today. Do let me know in the comments what you thought of either of the books that I've talked about today, and your general thoughts on magic realism, and if there's any other authors, any other books in particular, do let me know of those as well, because I do want to explore this genre more, most definitely. So yes, thank you very much for watching today, folks. I will be back later in the week with my top 10 art books and something else, probably a little discussion video. I've got a little discussion video in my head that probably needs making, so maybe that. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving it a like and subscribing for more content coming very soon. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.